So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me this hour. We're going to be talking about the issue of transgender. And again, a parental advisor. If you have young people listening, we're going to obviously get into sexuality and gender issues. So again, just be forewarned. But if you've listened to this program any length of time, you know that we've talked about issues like gender dysphoria. Oftentimes it used to be called gender identity disorder. We've talked about that with Ann Paulk, with Sue Boland, a variety of other individuals. And this, which really was something that only affected a fraction of a percent of the population, has sort of exploded. And so this hour, we're going to spend some time really talking about why that is and what is actually happening, in this case, to our daughters. The book is entitled Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze, Seducing Our Daughters. It is published by Gregory. It just came out a few days ago. Abigail Shrier is the author of the book and an individual that has a degree from, of course, Columbia College, as well as University of Oxford, and a law degree from Yale Law School. Perhaps you've seen some of her articles in the Wall Street Journal and other places. And if nothing else, Abigail, I appreciate you taking the time to tackle such a difficult subject as this.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me on.
What about this remarkable increase? Isn't it fair to say that it was just a very small percentage of young girls or boys, but we'll just talk about girls since that's the focus of your book, that in one way or another said, well, I'm a girl, but I really should be a boy, and I'm a boy in a girl's body, and that whole gender dysphoria issue was pretty small, but it seems like there's almost a social contagion taking place. Tell us more, if you might.
That's right. It's very fair to call this an epidemic, and it's all across the West. And the reason you can call it that is this is something, as you said, that afflicted 0.01%, so 1/100% of the population overall, and overwhelmingly it was males. And now we have 2% of high school students identifying as transgender in America, and overwhelmingly they're teenage girls with no childhood history of gender dysphoria at all. So this is not what gender dysphoria looks like. We know that. And we know that the prevalence is even higher within friend groups. So it looks a lot more like anorexia than it does look like gender dysphoria. It's young girls in distress deciding together that the problem with their the reason they're so unhappy is because they're so fat, or in this case, so gender dysphoric.
I love what you say. 3 decades ago, these kids or these girls might have hankered for liposuction while their physical forms wasted away. 2 decades ago, the trans-identified teens might have discovered a repressed memory of childhood trauma. Today's diagnostic craze isn't demon possession, it's gender dysphoria, and its cure is not exorcism, laxatives, or purging, it's testosterone and surgeries. And so in some respects you've seen, and I guess since I'm the old guy around the table, I've seen these trends and these fads come and go, but in some respects tying it back to something like anorexia makes some sense, because it does seem to be more of a social contagion, not a mental or psychological kind of issue, wouldn't you say?
Well, it's not. These girls are in genuine psychological distress. We know that they are experiencing, teenage girls today are in the midst of the worst mental health crisis we've ever seen, with the highest rates of suicidal ideation, of suicide, of depression and anxiety, and other modes of self-harm we've ever seen. But in prior generations, when a girl came out or identified herself as bulimic, she didn't get the encouragement and celebration of her teachers, her principal, her therapists, and doctors. But that is precisely what's going on when a young girl decides she's transgender, even though it means harming her body in all kinds of ways.
Let me just mention, too, there's about 12 chapters here. There's an introduction and then a number of chapters and then an afterward. And we're going to look at the girls, the puzzle, the influencers, the schools, the moms and dads I love the opening on the one on the shrinks with the chicken, but we'll get to that in a minute. Dissidents, some of these others. But let's get into just basic biology. Sometimes when I speak to the subject of sex education and the rest, I also point out that young girls are reaching puberty earlier than ever before. And as a result, you also document this as well. So as a result, it is even more difficult in this 21st century world than it was, say, maybe in the 19th century. Help us out.
Yeah, so the girls are younger, when puberty occurs, but it isn't just that they're physically younger; they're much, much mentally younger. So we experts like Jean Twenge, academic psychologists who study generations, note that Gen Z is the most sheltered generation, and they spend the least time with other kids in person. So they are spending a lot of time with their parents, and they're very, very young when puberty hits. At the same time, they're on social media, which makes them feel bad. It's very cruel in the way it pits them against each other and has them compare their bodies all the time. So I think it's fair to say that puberty has never been so tough on teenage girls as it is today.
Yes. Well, and you just mentioned something in passing, because we oftentimes talk about Jean Twenge. We do a millennial roundtable, sometimes talk about Gen Z or the iGen generation. This is a generation that isn't in contact as much with other young girls. So that's another factor. So you've got the biological factor, but speak to that whole issue as well, because you have that earlier in the book in which you are quoting from her and even Jonathan Haidt, who's been on the program with us as well, the whole issue of social media and those kinds of things. That's another factor that's playing out, isn't it?
Absolutely. Social media is so cruel to girls. We know that it makes all of us a little crazy, right? It makes us feel bad when we go in and compare our lives to each other's. But teenage girls are particularly vulnerable to worrying about how they measure up and whether they're liked by their peers and included. And today they go onto social media and they can see how much more popular another girl is. And not only when they don't get invited to a party, they actually have to look at all the pictures of that party. It's extremely cruel. And then the comments are cruel. And making that even worse, there's a host of transgender. I mean, literally, there are, thousands upon thousands of influencers on social media, young people making videos who can't wait to tell teens how great you'll feel if you just go on testosterone.
And so again, it's just reinforcing a behavior that in the past, the parents and the culture and the teachers would have said, I don't think that's such a good idea, right?
Right, exactly. And it's very cruel, I'll tell you, because these girls are in genuine distress. They really do have high anxiety. And one of the good, things about testosterone in a sense is that it alleviates anxiety. So, and it delivers a kind of euphoria. So girls who go on it can't wait to tell their friends how great they feel. Now, of course, the problem is that it delivers a whole host of other irreversible harms.
Sure. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into the different aspects of that. We sort of already mentioned the puzzle, but we'll get into that in a little more detail. Then the influencers, the schools, what about the moms and dads, the shrinks, the psychologists, and all sorts of other individuals that are encouraging this. And this is such a blockbuster book that I thought you would want to know about. It just came out the late part of June, and so we're talking about it today here on Point of View. And a little bit later, if you want to join the conversation, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. And we have information about this book on our website. You probably can find it in your local bookstore, but if not, we have information about it both in hardback and Kindle. Abigail Shrier with us. We'll continue our conversation with her right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Stephen McBride is predicting the end of college as we know it. Now, the key to his prediction is the last four words, as we know it. The prestigious universities will survive because they will always attract elite students and command huge tuitions. But what about the rest of the colleges that seem bent on teaching classes online? Cost will be a big issue. He reminds us that as recently as 1980, you could get a 4-year bachelor's degree at some colleges for $10,000. Now you will spend more than that in just one semester.
Students are burying themselves in debt over $1.6 trillion in order to attend college. But will students and their parents be willing to spend that kind of money when the kids aren't living on campus and walking to lectures? Instead, they'll be sitting in their bedrooms watching professors on Zoom calls. The college experience has been stripped away by the coronavirus. Already, colleges that are reopening only online are offering tuition discounts by as much as $9,000. They know that students aren't going to fork over $30,000 a year to watch classroom lectures on Zoom. Soon, students will start looking for other ways to complete a college degree for much less than the cost of traditional college. At the same time, the existing online universities can hire away many of the best teaching professors and couple their lectures with great graphics, videos, and interactive features. And they can do all that for a fraction of the cost of brick-and-mortar schools. When all the dust settles, this will be a bargain for families who will save money and load less student debt on their kids. Much of the liberal and socialist indoctrination will also fade away. There'll still be colleges, but it looks like we are headed for some changes that will end the traditional college experience as we know it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Abigail Shrier with us as we talk about her book, Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. And Abigail, there's a chapter there on the puzzle. We sort of talked about this already, but there's this idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria, but then also this argument that these girls that were identifying as transgender were caught up in a craze. Now, I did not realize the word craze also had a technical meaning in sociology. It's a cultural enthusiasm that spreads like a virus. But in some respects, we've gone from just a fraction of young girls who identified as gender dysphoric, or whatever phrase you want to use, to a variety of those showing up simultaneously. So what were you finding, especially when you were quoting from Dr. Littman?
So I interviewed Dr. Littman many times. She's a public health researcher in Brown University who did the study. And the thing is, when gender dysphoria existed, we have a 100-year diagnostic history. We know what gender dysphoria looks like. It looks like it comes on in early childhood, and it's little boys, really insisting they're girls, only wanting to dress as girls, only wanting to play as girls, and sometimes even punching their private parts, really just showing discomfort. It was not girls in any significant numbers ever in the entire diagnostic history. And when it did emerge in early childhood for girls, they always had this childhood history. So we never saw it among teenage girls. Now teenage girls are the leading demographic. Okay. Wow. In 2016, for instance, the number of gender surgeries on biological females quadrupled.
So again, this is a very significant issue. One of the things I thought was kind of interesting is that because Dr. Littman has done this research, it's so hilarious. They say, well, then she must be right-wing. She never voted Republican. She must be a Christian. No, she's Jewish. And so I appreciate you pointing that out, because as soon as you at all go across anything that's seen as politically correct, you start getting these labels, and every one of them does not fit her for sure. But let's get into another chapter, because since you have so many chapters, I want to finish on time. But the influencers, because this is the key. Where is this coming from? And there are a number of statements that I love. If you think you might be trans, you are. Now, we've seen this a little bit in the homosexual movement. That is, if you've ever had feelings for somebody of the same sex, well, you need to act on them because maybe you are. So there were a number of these kinds of phrases and cliches that are used that maybe even made this more likely. What did you find?
So the thing to know about this is that social media has so many of these transgender influencers, and they are major influences in children's lives today. Teenagers do not spend as much time in person together, but they spend a lot of time online. And there are repetitive phrases, as you just brought up, that allow them to basically self-indoctrinate and be told, if you don't feel like a girl, you're not a girl, you're something else. And one of the things about these is that it's very easy to stumble upon them. So you might not even be looking for a transgender site. In fact, a lot of the kids come to this through an art sharing site called DeviantArt. And it's kind of a hip art sharing site. And so they go on thinking they're just going to share their art. Maybe they're talented kids. And in fact, what they end up with is a lot of gender ideology.
Wow. Well, and some of them are really dangerous because, like you say, one of them, testosterone, or T, is amazing. It may just solve all of your problems. And so if you're, and Trans 101 video series, I'm just picking one example there, then you try it. It actually maybe calms the girl down, maybe seems like a perfect fit, and you're off and running, aren't you?
That's right. I mean, the thing to know about testosterone is the reason this is so insidious, this message, is because it does seem to be a cure for female puberty in a certain sense. It stops your period. Testosterone stops your period. It reduces anxiety. It gives a feeling of euphoria, and it redistributes fat away from the problematic areas for young girls. So it makes girls feel great. Unfortunately, it also does a bunch of other things too.
Yes.
So it does cause all kinds of irreversible harms, in addition to being extremely risky in terms of cardiovascular effects, and increases rates of heart attack by a lot. It also gives body hair, facial hair, and changes private anatomy, as well as leading to infertility.
We can also see why some of these girls who are saying, I want to be an athlete, but I've got these trans boys now calling themselves girls, so I guess they'd be trans girls, but they are boys. They're out competing us in every one of these events, so maybe the only way to even up the odds is to take testosterone and play their game against them with hormones.
I think it's not lost on girls today they have fallen in status in the broader culture. When they see mediocre boy athletes being able to take their trophies, they know that the culture has turned against them. When they see biological men, as has happened, when they go into their locker rooms and find a biological male showering there, a grown man in their showers, and they are told by the pool that that's allowed because he identifies as a woman, they know the culture has turned against them. And what they're looking for is a victim identity that will give them a shield from all the sort of, lack of status in the broader culture. And choosing a transgender identity gives them that shield and that status.
Yes. One other one I want to get to before we move on to another chapter. If your parents loved you, they would support your trans identity. That's the other insidious aspect of this, is it turns kids against their parents. It says your parents don't know what they're doing. Of course, that's a good lead up to what we're going to talk about in just a minute in terms of the schools. But this idea that your parents don't know what they're doing, and if they really loved you, they would actually go along with your desire to go trans rather than to actually warn you about the possible dangers of it.
That's right. I think of these transgender influences online as sort of the worst influences in every high school times 1,000. They're enormously charismatic. They produce these incredibly well-edited videos, so they come across as perfect. And they are constantly pumping messages that are really harmful to teenagers, like you should cut off your family.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. One other one I wanted to get to, and then we'll get to more after the break, is the issue of the schools. You know, there was a time in which parents and schools teachers, everybody were on the same page on some of these issues, but not the case anymore, because what you find now is the situation in which oftentimes the schools, because of the pressure from maybe a trans lobby, feel like they have to go along with this, maybe even give encouragement to this, because they don't want to be perceived as intolerant, right?
Right. So one of the chapters I was proudest of is honestly my investigation into the California public school system.
There you go.
Which is so radical, and it's so radical and so oppositional to the wishes of parents. And they have foisted on people a gender ideology and sexual orientation curriculum that parents are not allowed to opt out of. Many times they don't even realize it, because it goes under the guise of anti-bullying. And what people don't realize is that our teachers, and I didn't know until I did this investigation, is that the teachers in the public school system are being trained directly by activists.
Yes. And we've seen some of that happening in the past, because when we've had these anti-bullying programs, they were oftentimes LGBTQ type of individuals, and that's what's going on there. And I was struck by just even the way in which you had letters that you receive from like the Teachers Association and things like that. M.X. Shrier, instead of not Mr. Miss, and the he, she, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they're just trying to be as politically trans correct as possible. But we need to take one of those mandatory breaks, and we've only gone through a few chapters. We'll keep it up as we go through the break and then get into some more of this afterwards. But if you find yourself saying, okay, I would really like to read this book, I don't want to read the book, but I know I have to read this book. I really need to understand this. Or perhaps you have a friend that's maybe struggling with that, with his or her daughter. Again, we have information about this. I am sure you probably will be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we also have it available today on our website that you can find the link and get it both in hardcover and Kindle. It is an important issue. It's one we've identified before, and this is perhaps one of the most thorough books I've seen on the subject, and we've talked about just a few of the issues in terms of the girls, the influencers, and the schools. When we come back, we're going to talk about the moms and the dads, the shrinks, the dissidents, I love that piece, as well as the regret, the way back, and just all sorts of other things. We're trying to tell you the truth. Sometimes that can be very controversial in this day and age, but that's why we're covering this today. And if you'd like to know more about Abigail, or if you'd like to know more about the book, you can click all sorts of information that we have available on our website, pointofview.net. And if you'd like to join the conversation, we'll open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. We have a lot to cover, so you may just want to sit back and listen, but if you got a question, we'd be willing to entertain it as well. We'll be back right after this.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today as we talk about Irreversible Damage, the transgender craze seducing our daughters. Abigail Shrier with us, and one of the chapters, Abigail, is moms and dads, and that kind of brings us to two issues. Number one, some parents that go along, but you start the story by telling about Catherine Cave, who is actually accused of being transphobic, who had been maybe somewhat indulgent in the daughter's gender exploration, but this is the big question, because some of our listeners right now say, you know, you're talking about something I'm dealing with right now with my daughter, or I know this is happening to my niece or my friend's daughter, and we don't know what to do, because if you try to inject any kind of sanity in this conversation, any kind of common sense, then you're just transphobic and you're not supporting me in my gender exploration. So what have you been able to discern in terms of the influence of parents, both in some cases going along with this and in other cases parents wanting to try to provide some very important common sense in the midst of all of this?
So the reason I wrote the book is there's a lot parents can do, and I give some advice in the book about some of the sorts of things they can do. Depends, of course, what age the child is. So if the teenager is still living at home, the parents have a lot more influence. Okay, and one of the most important things for a parent to do is to get the kid off social media. It allows for such constant indoctrination that anything they can do to get their child off of social media will certainly be good for them and you know, will help their mental health. Another thing to do is to oppose gender ideology in the schools. I go through in the book just how thorough the gender ideology indoctrination is in some of our schools. Mm-hmm. And there's no reason for it. You can show compassion to a transgender child without indoctrinating the entire student body and sowing confusion. And another thing to do, and this is the third thing that and it's something you touched on, you can listen and show compassion for your child, your daughter, without agreeing with their self-diagnosis. So in other words, you know, you don't have to agree that she was a boy or is always a boy, or that gender dysphoria is her problem. Very often, you know, I talk to a lot of parents, a lot of them politically progressive, and they were very open-minded, which is a wonderful thing, but they were willing to believe that their daughter's problem might really be gender dysphoria. And in some cases, the real problem had nothing to do with gender dysphoria at all.
Right. And again, that's understandable, and not always assuming that the answer is testosterone and surgeries and those kinds of things. But let's, if we can, get to the chapter on shrinks. I did not expect reading this book I'd laugh out loud, but I did. And I read this to my producer because here's the story. A woman walks into a therapist's office dragging her teenage son. Doctor, she says, please help. My son thinks he's a chicken. The son says, well, if there's one thing I can tell you about chickens, it's that we know who we are. Where's your proof, though? Woman demands of her son. You have no feathers. True, the son says. I went through the wrong puberty. The woman turns to the therapist. See what I mean? He's lost his mind. The therapist replies, you're the one arguing with a chicken. And again, you're having fun at the expense of this, but that is, in some respects, exactly what you run into, because you have this sort of gender-affirming therapy that says, well, if they feel that way, then they really need to act on their feelings. Always trust your feelings. That's kind of out of that book. Again, The Coddling of the American Mind. And once they feel that way, it seems to me that at least a number of therapists actually, in one way or another, are affirming that. What have you found?
So that's right. That's the standard of care for therapists in America today is affirmative care. They are told they must affirm, they must agree with the self-diagnosis of the patient. And if a young girl comes in and says, I think I'm a boy, I might be a boy, could you call me Jim? The therapist says, okay, Jim. Now, and treats her as if she's correct. Now, imagine we let this be the treatment for anorexics. Imagine a girl came into her therapist and said, I feel so fat. Please call me fatty. I know I'm fat. And the therapist said, okay, fatty, let's talk about how we can get you liposuction. We would say that was monstrous, but that's what's being done to young girls who say they have gender dysphoria.
One of the arguments for this is that if we don't, they might kill themselves, which again is a threat, or that an adolescent is the best person to know who she is. I know enough about my years of adolescence, but I wasn't a girl, but you were. And it seems to me that sometimes an adolescent girl is probably the person least able to self-diagnose themselves. What about that?
That's right. So that's right. A few things. Number one, obviously the mental health of girls in this position and of transgender teens generally is a big cause of concern. There is a very high rate of suicide. But
Yes.
Here's what we don't have proof of. We don't have proof that affirmation and hormones reduce suicidality. And we don't have proof that gender dysphoria is the cause of the suicidality in transgender teens. So given that it may neither be the cause nor a solution, that really shouldn't be used to, force, as a gun to the head to force parents into doing something they don't think is right for their kids.
Sure. Which brings us to the dissidents, and I was thrilled that you quote from Dr. Paul McHugh, because we have quoted him many times, but you also quote from sexologists Ray Blanchard and Michael Bailey and a number of others. So take us through this, because there are individuals that have looked at this and said, this is, and they maybe don't use the word crazy, but illogical, whatever phrases they want to use, but they are disagreeing with this idea of gender affirming and giving adolescents, and sometimes this begins even younger, as you well know, individuals treatments and hormones and surgeries and all sorts of things, all in the attempt to cure or treat the problem, which may not be gender dysphoria in the first place.
That's right. I interviewed all kinds of world experts on gender dysphoria and one of the and in psychiatry, and one of the things they agreed on, although they disagree within themselves about how they characterize gender dysphoria and what the appropriate treatment might be,
right,
they all agree on a few things. One, that this population does not seem to have actual gender dysphoria. And two, it doesn't seem that, and two, importantly, this is a psychopathology. It's something to treat, not to hand over the prescription pad to the young teenagers.
Yes, and it seems to me that that's a key point, is that if you look at this, the argument has always been that the reason these young people are then, because they were getting transgender treatments, still committing suicide, is because we're so anti-transgender, anti-homosexual. But if you go to other places, Abigail, around the world that are much more tolerant, say the Nordic countries and things like that, you still see the suicide rate. So it suggests to me that the easy argument that this is just due to the fact that we're so transphobic isn't really the case. And again, almost to a person, they acknowledge that there may be an issue here, but it isn't gender dysphoria. And they're also pretty much agreeing that doing surgeries and other kinds of hormonal treatments aren't actually solving the problem at all, is it?
Not for these girls, it's not, because gender dysphoria wasn't really their problem. And that's really the reason for the book. If these girls were flourishing, I tell the story of Julie, that's the name I gave her, of a young, and she's one of many, a young girl who in high school was such a talented ballerina, and was really looking to do it through college and professionally. And she really got caught up in this. And she ended up, she never went to college. She's now, I think, working her way up in a restaurant, finally managed to become a waitress. But this was a young girl with so much promise, and she's gone through the double mastectomy and whatnot, who once she got caught up into this ideology, her whole future got derailed. And that's very often the story.
Yes. Well, let's, if we can, talk about the promoted and the demoted. It's gone this long before I've actually said the words Caitlyn Jenner, okay? And, of course, you also point out that Christine Jorgensen was perhaps the first American transgender celebrity. But what you have are those which are promoted, and that also gives encouragement and emphasis towards this transgender movement, doesn't it?
Yeah, when girls are in distress, especially psychological distress, it's hard to explain your pain to someone in a way that will make them listen. So at various times in our history, people explained it in terms of multiple personality disorder because that got everyone's attention, and they believe that to be the case. And today they look into the culture and they wonder what might be wrong. And there's so many television shows and celebrities that will tell you that gender dysphoria is the problem. So they've latched onto this as their solution and their problem. And unfortunately, the medical professions have just gone along with it in a really unquestioning way.
Yes. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get a little more specific about the transformation, testosterone and the risks, the surgeries, and even the regrets. And so, again, we'll continue our conversation. The book is entitled Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. We'll continue that conversation right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue conversation with Abigail Shrier for just a few more minutes. Irreversible Damage, and you should be able to find the book in your local bookstore, published by Regnery, but we have information about it as well on our website, pointofview.net. Let's talk about the transformation and some of the, it's just pretty sad to see what some of these young girls put themselves through. And then you have a chapter which is really poignant about the regret. And it is sad to say that we have a growing number of stories of young people who thought this was going to make them happy and only concluded at the end that it did not.
That's right. I tell the story of a lot of young women, but one of them, Desmond, went through a very hard time in high school and right away had a therapist encourage her in the idea that her problem was gender dysphoria and she really was a boy. And as soon as she was able, she pursued a course of testosterone that caused terrible uterine atrophy, as it can, and uterine pain. And she ended up with a hysterectomy, which happens. And only when, she had been so encouraged by her doctors throughout the hormone therapy, even through the top surgery, which is a double mastectomy. And then she woke up after her hysterectomy, which was the result of the testosterone, and she realized this whole thing had been a mistake.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, there were no cheerleaders around anymore, and no one to tell her what to do to cure her dysphoria. It turned out that had never been her real problem.
Well, it's certainly just a sad reality. And again, you go into some of the treatments, some of the surgeries, and all of the rest. But just in the time we have remaining, what could we actually provide for some of our listeners here who are saying, I've been listening to this whole discussion. I had no idea this was coming up today. This is something that we're dealing with, or I have a friend or a neighbor, a coworker, family member that's dealing with this. And you have a whole section here on the way back. What can we provide to them in terms of suggestions and ideas that might make a difference? Because we need to talk about certainly trying to prevent young people from getting all of their information from their smartphone and social media. And at the same time, we need to find some ways to really encourage them. So what might you recommend?
Absolutely. So there's a lot that parents can do. Number one, get their kids off of social media. We know that it's harming girls especially very badly. And it's opening them to all kinds of bad influences. Number two, oppose gender identity or sexual orientation announcements online. Very often a teenager will not only, and I heard this from many girls I interviewed, they will make an announcement, oh, I'm gay, oh, I'm transgender, whatever it is, and they think they're just realizing themselves as an adult, but what they really are is they're sending up a flare to actual adults who may take advantage. So really getting them off social media is important. Another thing is to oppose gender ideology in the schools. There is no reason to indoctrinate an entire student body in gender confusion. And two more things. Remember that parents should be the parents. So they can listen to their daughters without agreeing with them. They don't need to accept everything their daughters say, especially if they don't think it's good for them or correct. And the last thing I would say is that girls need girl time in person with their girlfriends. This is something that provides them a lot of comfort during a very confusing time. And unfortunately, teenage girls today are not spending enough time with each other when they're not on their phones.
Yes. Well, and again, one of the things that we have here at Point of View are a lot of activists, and I love your piece there. Don't support gender ideology in your child's education. Find out what's going on, because lots of times you would be shocked at what is actually taught in some of these classes and some of these seminars and those kinds of things. But you had some good ideas, which I'd never thought of before. One of those was reintroduce privacy into the home. Hadn't thought about that. And consider big steps to separate your daughter from harm. Can you kind of explain that? Because that's just another kind of action item for a parent that maybe is dealing with some of this.
Right. So if the girl is already being indoctrinated and already having a transgender identity, there's a few things. Number one, the support groups can be wonderful. Parents of ROGD Kids is great. Fourth Wave Now is a wonderful website. So there are places parents can go to for really good information. Another thing is sometimes you have to remove your daughter from her peer influence. That if she's caught up in this gender identity, if she has decided she's a boy at school, it's humiliating to announce to a school effectively, never mind, I was wrong, especially because the school will celebrate it and sometimes will confirm that identity for years before the parents ever find out. They keep it a secret from the parents. It's very common. So sometimes the parents actually have to remove them from the environment.
One of the things I also would encourage people to do is if they have more information or they would like to get more information, we do have a link to your Twitter page, your Twitter feed, and I might just mention that that's available on our website. And I noticed that you've posted quite a bit about this book and other information, so that would be a way in which people could contact you. And of course, would you be available to come and speak to groups that are wanting to address this issue? Because now that you have a book out there, I would imagine that there would be a lot of people that would want to schedule you to come and speak to some of these issues.
Absolutely. I'm very happy to do that. In fact, parents get in touch with me all the time. So I'm talking to parents all the time, and I'm very happy to talk to parent groups anytime.
I would mention that you have just an enormous number of endnotes and even a suggested bibliography. So if people say, well, is this just her ideas? First of all, no, because you have done some great interviews with individuals. And as far as I can tell, it is perhaps one of the most complete books I've ever seen on the subject. So it is to be commended to our listeners. And I just want to thank you, Abigail, for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, really.
We are going to take a break, and let me just mention that this book is available perhaps in your local bookstore, but we also have information about it on the website. So if you are aware of someone, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else that would benefit from some of the research, it has been very well put together. Great accolades from Dennis Prager and Ben Shapiro and John Podhoretz and all sorts of people have been on this program, so I think you will benefit tremendously from the book, and it is available on our website, pointofview.net. You know, as you go to the website, you're going to find a lot of great material, and let me just give you a preview of this a week, because in just an hour, we're going to be talking with Greg Jantz. Interestingly enough, Glenn Kreider and Sandra Glahn will be with us, and we'll be talking about sanctified sexuality. It's going to be really a great week of all sorts of topics that we're going to be addressing, and I hope you'll join us every single day. So as you go to the website, you're going to find a lot of great information. As we always do, we encourage you, first of all, to take action. I've had some of you the other day say that you got the email and sent information to your two senators and your representative about one bill, one subject. And if you've not taken the time to do that, that is available at our website under our Take Action section. My Viewpoints commentary is available to you today, and I would encourage you to get that and to promote it. And as we've pointed out before, if you sign up to get the Viewpoints commentary, of course, that is something that we like to put in your inbox. Mine come to you Monday through Friday. Penna Dexter's, of course, comes to you on Saturday. So those are some resources that we always make available at Point of View. If you find yourself saying in this interview or other interviews we're going to be doing this week that you would like to hear them again, there's a couple ways to do that. First of all, you can go to the website, which is pointofview.net. Click on that button that says listen. That will allow you to download a podcast, and you can put it on any device that you might have and listen to that. But if you'd like to watch it, of course, you can click on that button, or you can even simply go to the YouTube channel, which we've made available to you. So there are just a lot of great resources that we are trying to put in your hands. And even today, as we talk about what is somewhat of a controversial issue with Abigail Shrier, we want you to be educated about this so that you can be able to articulate a responsible and biblically based view on these very important topics. So let's take a break. But when we come back, we're going to spend some time getting into a couple of other very important issues in the news. You can go to the website during the break at pointofview.net and finding out a little bit more. And as you go there, I hope you might even think about clicking on that button that says donate, because after all, we're still dependent on your financial support to get us through this summer. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition of Point of View. In this first hour, we're going to focus some time and attention on a topic that we have talked about quite a bit in light of the pandemic and the lockdown. That's the issue of anxiety and depression. So we're going to focus some time and attention on a book and a booklet that you might want to know about. Next hour, we're going to get into the news and talk about a couple of issues that have surfaced. Dr. Birx, for example, has been in the news for a variety of reasons. First, her comments, and then the back and forth about her as well. Some questions being raised now about the individual that is running for the presidency in the Democratic ticket, and that is the former Vice President Joe Biden. More and more questions about his mental issues, and we'll also get into some other topics about the protest riots and much, much more. So over the next couple of hours, we will be covering lots of different topics, but I want to bring back to the microphone an individual we've interviewed before, Dr. Gregory Jantz, who is the founder of the Center, A Place of Hope. It's in Edmonds, Washington. It's considered one of the top 10 facilities for depression treatment. We also, in addition to the book we're going to be talking about today, Healing Depression for Life, also will mention a booklet that's out, 7 Answers for Anxiety. So we'll get into both of those issues. We have information about both of these on the website. He's an individual that has been with us before, author of 40 books. You've seen him on CBS, ABC, NBC. He's been on with Jim Dobson's Family Talk time and time again. And Dr. Gregory Jantz, welcome back to Point of View.
My goodness, good to be with you today. You got it.
Well, I want to spend some time, if we can, getting into your book, Healing Depression for Life, because what you say is depression does not have to be a life sentence. And in some respects, one of the things I love about your work, whether it's on depression or whether it's about boys and kids and child rearing, whatever it might be, I mean, you bring so much to the table. You really look at this from what you might call a holistic Christian world and life view and really have kind of a personalized approach. Is that a fair assessment of kind of what we're going to be talking about today?
Well, we really believe in this whole person approach. And in fact, I think you're the first person for me to say this is our 38th year starting today.
Wow.
So we've been showing up for a while. Yes.
And you actually have seen quite a number of people. And you've also recognized that sometimes there has been maybe an argument from people in the medical profession. Well, since everything has to do with some kind of chemical imbalance, then when I come to brain issues, I treat that the same way. And I give you a pill or I give you some kind of medication. You're not against the standard treatment, but you recognize there's just a whole lot more to look at than just simply assuming, as you use in your book, that if all you have is a hammer, you assume everything is a nail. And you want to look at it in a much broader perspective, don't you?
Oh, we do. And we know that medication can be helpful for a period of time, but we also want to be really careful to look at, well, what are the root causes? What do I need to do to get long-term recovery? In other words, long-term success. And so, we really believe you've got to get down, what are the root issues? Yeah, there can be some chemical issues, there can be some past trauma, but what's going on in a person's life? And by the way, depression and anxiety right now are at all-time highs. And, a lot of reasons for that right now.
Well, we certainly understand that, and one of the reasons I wanted to cover some of this today, because this is an ongoing issue. Depression, anxiety, some of the things we're going to talk about, but those have peaked because of isolation, loneliness, lack of accountability, not having human interaction, and all the rest. And so really, if I can kind of summarize your book, 230 pages, published by Tyndale, came out last year, so it will be very easy, I would suspect, for most of our listeners to find it in their bookstore, but also we have a way for them to order it by going to our website, get it in hardback or Kindle. We also have a link to your website, because I know some people are going to want to know a little bit more about aplaceofhope.com. But you really break it down into three areas: the mind, the soul, and the body. And just the fact that you do it that way kind of eliminates the way in which many individuals have been treating depression, because they only look at it as a body issue, not as a mind issue or a soul issue. And so in some respects, this gets us back to this whole concept of a whole person perspective, right?
Absolutely. And, this is why, and I think, a number of years ago, we were voted in the top 10 places to go to get help for depression. And I think it really the foundation of having a solid faith foundation. And really, we see ourselves, if you will, as happy detectives looking, okay, what's the missing pieces to the puzzle? And let's stay with this until we get all those missing pieces. People are suffering. In fact, we hear it over and over. They're suffering too long. And people will say, man, I wish I would have got help sooner. And I guess I'm concerned right now because we have such high numbers of people paralyzed by fear and anxiety and depression. And our suicide numbers, too, are going up. So this is a message I want to get out passionately, that there is hope.
Yes. And again, you talk about it being a team effort, because that involves everything from medication to talk therapy to cognitive behavioral therapy, praying, and a variety of other issues. So in some respects, you're really trying to look at the whole person, which sort of gets eliminated sometimes if indeed you're going to an individual with a MD degree, because they're only looking at kind of the body part. And we're going to spend some time in just a minute here talking about a mind, body, and soul to take on each part of a human being's issues, and in some respects might be missing some very important elements, because you are trying to look at the whole person as a team effort, right?
Absolutely. We've got to do this as a team. That's where you're going to get the long-term success.
Well, let's, if we can, get into the whole idea of mind. That's the first section. And the first thing that I love that you talk about is the curative power of a solid night's sleep. Anybody that is out there, and we even have people that work with us here at Point of View that have had sleep issues, can tell you very quickly, if you want to get depressed, just all of a sudden no longer be able to sleep, because that is something that is absolutely necessary for the body. Tell us more, if you might.
Oh, absolutely. I used to work in sleep research and studying sleep stages, and we know that if you don't spend enough time in the appropriate stages, you will develop an anxious and or depressed brain. So sleep is restorative. The Bible talks about having sweet sleep. Man, do we need sleep? That's that restorative, renewing sleep. And so often what we're hearing right now is people are having trouble going to sleep. Their brains are overstimulated, but then they wake up during the night. Sometimes their heart's racing. They feel like they're in a cold sweat. It's like you're having a panic attack in your sleep. And that's the sign that anxiety has really got a stronghold.
Yes, and so when we come back from the break, we're going to get into that a little bit more. And I'm going to go from preaching to meddling pretty quick, because we're going to talk about your devices and your depression. And that's another part of that issue of interrupting the sleep cycle. And so today we're talking about the book that's been out for some time. It is published by Tyndale, written by Dr. Gregory Jantz, and it is entitled Healing Depression for Life, a Personalized Approach That Offers New Hope for the Lasting Relief. A little bit later, we will talk about this little booklet that we also have a link to, 7 Answers for Anxiety. In some respects, the two are related. We'll kind of connect that up as well. And a little bit later, if you'd like to join the conversation, maybe you have some comments or questions, you are welcome to do so. That number is 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Gregory Jantz with us. He's been with us before. Of course, you hear him quite often on Family Talk with Jim Dobson, and we will continue our conversation with him right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Stephen McBride is predicting the end of college as we know it. Now, the key to his prediction is the last four words, as we know it. The prestigious universities will survive because they will always attract elite students and command huge tuitions. But what about the rest of the colleges that seem bent on teaching classes online? Cost will be a big issue. He reminds us that as recently as 1980, you could get a four-year bachelor's degree at some colleges for $10,000. Now you will spend more than that in just one semester. Students are burying themselves in debt over $1.6 trillion in order to attend college. But will students and their parents be willing to spend that kind of money when the kids aren't living on campus and walking to lectures? Instead, they'll be sitting in their bedrooms watching professors on Zoom calls. The college experience has been stripped away by the coronavirus. Already, colleges that are reopening only online are offering tuition discounts by as much as $9,000. They know that students aren't going to fork over $30,000 a year to watch classroom lectures on Zoom. Soon, students will start looking for other ways to complete a college degree for much less than the cost of traditional college. At the same time, the existing online universities can hire away many of the best teaching professors and couple their lectures with great graphics, videos, and interactive features. And they can do all that for a fraction of the cost of brick-and-mortar schools. When all the dust settles, this will be a bargain for families who will save money and load less student debt on their kids. Much of the liberal and socialist indoctrination will also fade away. There'll still be colleges, but it looks like we are headed for some changes that will end the traditional college experience as we know it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
He's with us today, Dr. Gregory Jantz, as we talk about his book, Healing Depression for Life. It is published by Tyndale, about 230 pages, broken into three sections that we're going to talk about: mind, soul, and body. Right now, we're going to focus on the mind, a little bit later, soul. What about some of these toxic emotions and some of the issues that are part of your spirit that we need to address? Then we'll come back to the body as well in terms of eating right, micronutrients. We're really just going to try to address all of these topics. And as we talk about this issue of soul care, I might just mention that's another book by Dr. Jantz. And so they're just all sorts of great resources. But one of the chapters that you have in the category on mind is called Your Devices, Your Depression. Now, I've suggested to my children in particular that when you have to charge your phone, do it in the other room, not in the bedroom, because then you will be less likely if you wake up to go and check your feeds, your various emails, your texts, and everything like that. And in some respects, we have problems with sleep cycles. It's been made a whole lot worse because of these devices that we carry around with us, hasn't it?
Well, we can overstimulate the brain, plus the information that we're putting in the brain. You know, if you're in the digital world all day long and right up to bedtime, you're going to probably go to bed anxious and depressed. That's the nature of it right now. And so, I always suggest at least an hour before bedtime, wean yourself off. Get off, that blue light that comes out of the devices is not helpful for sleep stages. The stuff we're reading, you can all day long, you can go from notification to notification. And you will be anxious at the end of the day.
Yes. Well, and again, you give some very definite action plans in each one of these chapters, and that is, keep a log of your digital use, which now most of your phones do anyway, to track your interaction with other technology.
Yes.
Put yourself on a tech diet. And I thought I'd speak to that one for just a minute, because one of my colleagues was actually teaching a number of years ago this class on technology. And it was interesting, Dr. Jantz, that one of the requirements in this technology and society class was for each one of the students to take a 48-hour technology fast. Back then it was pretty easy because the only technology probably had were these phones. And so what they would do is they would hand their phone over. He'd put it in the drawer in his office. And then 2 days later, they could come back and get their phone. And first of all, you had a lot of students that, if they did it, come back almost sweating after 2 days. And a good number of the students would just rather take a 0 on the assignment because they could not imagine their life without that technology. So as I read through your chapter here, I was just struck by the fact that this is a big problem. Kind of gets us almost into the issue of addictions, which you talk about as well. The technological addictions are some things we really need to pay attention to.
We do, and there is really, truly, some people think, there's not really an addiction. If you've ever been to lunch with somebody and they're sitting there texting away, and they look up at you and they say, "What'd you say?" You see, technology creates a partial attention. And that partial attention can devalue a relationship. It's like you're competing for that device. Maybe a good place to start is just to have a rule: when you're with somebody, be with them. It doesn't mean you don't show them something, but ask permission.
Yeah.
But be there wholeheartedly. That puts value back on the relationship.
On this chapter on mind, you have a whole chapter, of course, on stress and depressed. It's called Stressed and Depressed, How to Tame Chronic Stress and Regain Emotional Wellness. We live in a world of stress. I think we've always had stress, but Hans Selye kind of coined the term. And so now today we talk about how stressed out we are. But you also provide some data to show that stress is on the rise. Many people predicted that by the time we got to the 21st century, we'd have so much relaxation time that we wouldn't be stressed at all. But now the stress of life is greater than it ever has been, isn't it?
Oh, it's greater than it's ever been. And the chronic stress. So we take what everybody's been through. We take quarantine, and quarantine after a while kind of becomes confinement. And it's like a ticking time bomb. People are going to revolt, rebel, and we're seeing this now. So the degree that this is affecting mental health, and then we have a lot of fear that's being interjected into this. And we have people that talk about chronic stress, and this is going on. And it's kind of like a pandemic purgatory. I say that, it's like we're stuck. We don't know what the future holds, but this current place is miserable as well.
And again, you have isolation, withdrawal, just all sorts of other issues that are making an existing problem even worse over these last couple of months, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. So over time, chronic stress will have not only some emotional implications like, depression, anxiety, but it will also have an effect on our body physically. We know that chronic stress can increase inflammation in the body, affect digestion. And so, if you will, too much chronic stress that doesn't go away, it could be the beginning of the body screaming back. It could be, as far as disease process, you're not sleeping well. And so we need to address this chronic stress right now. And self-care, sleep, good nutrition. People right now are probably engaging in more self-destructive behavior, like turning to alcohol, turning to food, drugs. People are doing things to seek relief, but they're not the best things to do.
Good point. And we're in the section here on Mind, and you've already alluded to the other chapter, a hard look at hard issues, and that has to do with the whole issue of addictions and the various substances. Of course, you can talk about alcohol, tobacco, prescription medication, even caffeine and sugar and all sorts of other issues. We've already, of course, talked about social media and the internet, but it's relationships, it's pornography, it's shopping, it's gambling, it's anger. This is a big issue, and it is, again, one of the reasons why you focus some time and attention on it when we talk about what we're putting into our mind, because that has an impact on whether or not later on we begin to manifest the symptoms of depression.
Absolutely. We've got to have a way to renew our minds, put the truth in. I think, too, people need to go outside. You need to be going for that 20, 30-minute walk every day, maybe twice a day, and use it for a time for prayer. Use it for a time of, we're even having our team write down a verse on a 3x5 card. Take that out of your pocket as you're going for a walk and say that out loud. Put some good things in the mind right now.
Well, and again, you have an action plan at the end of each chapter, and this one talks about, get real, get help, get active, as you mentioned just a minute ago, get out, and sometimes that's part of the problem because we're told to be kind of locked down, but still getting out and about where you can, even walk in the neighborhood, and get accountable, because this is a key issue that there are going to be some very significant changes that you want individuals to make if we want to help them address this issue of depression. But accountability is going to be a key to actually making sure that somebody says, okay, what did you do today? What kind of ways did you reward your behavior? What addictions did you fall into? And so accountability is a key aspect of that, isn't it?
Accountability, we all need somebody in our life to, tell us the truth and encourage us. Have those 2 to 3 key people in your life that you can be real honest with, who are praying for you, walking with you through this. This is not the time to isolate.
Not at all. Well, let's take a break, and we're talking about the book Healing Depression for Life. And when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit about what is available at this website, which is put together by Dr. Gregory Jantz. But we've focused some of our time and attention on the first section, which is the mind. We come back from the break, we're going to talk about the soul and this idea of soul care, which, by the way, is another book that you can get from Dr. Jantz as well. And then finally, we'll talk about the body and making sure that you eat right and take out the trash. We'll explain what that means in just a minute. Is your gut stuck in a rut? I think you'll appreciate that. And even the magic of micronutrients. And if you really want to get yourself healthy, and if you're in the process of helping someone else get healthy, we want to make this available to you. And so information about the book is on the website. And before we're done, we'll also talk briefly about this little booklet, 7 Answers for Anxiety. And so there's both a book and a booklet that we have on our website today. So if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about this, I'd like to know more about this particular organization that Dr. Gregory Jantz is a part of, aplaceofhope.com. Go to the website. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about some of the resources that are available there in addition to this book and booklet, and take the time to go to the website pointofview.net, or you can go directly to a center, which is aplaceofhope.com. We'll take a break and spend a little bit more time talking about that right after these important messages.
When you gift a point of view, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dyes would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penn Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the truth team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Gregory Jantz. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. The book is entitled Healing Depression for Life. It is published by Tyndale. Came out last year, so you should be able to find it. But let me also point you to the website, aplaceofhope.com. And Dr. Jantz, of course, depression is one of the things you treat there. Eating disorders, I think you've always been known for that. Anxiety treatment, addiction problems, relationship issues, abuse, trauma, OCD, PTSD, even spiritual renewal. So in some respects, the center, A Place of Hope, is really an attempt to address a number of different issues and to look at kind of the whole person in trying to treat that. True?
Absolutely. It's that whole thing of, okay, what are the missing pieces to the puzzle? And when you do this as a team, you can look at, okay, is it chemical? Are there nutrient deficiencies? Is there a vitamin D deficiency? Is something going on in an internal organ? Is there digestive issues? You've got to do this, and find the different missing pieces to the puzzle if we want long-term success. Most folks who we see come to us and they go, I've been doing this medication, and at first it helped, but something's still just not right.
Right.
And so, we say, okay, it's a great bridge. It's a great bridge to help us. But if we just look at one approach as the only solution, we may be disappointed.
I would think so. So we've talked already about mind. Let's move on soul. This is a shorter section, but first of all, you remind us that there are some really deadly, even if you will, toxic emotions, anger, guilt, and fear. And I think it illustrates, again, the value of the whole person approach, because if somebody is dealing with guilt and you go to a doctor that's not looking at this from a biblical point of view, it might be you're feeling guilt because you're really guilty, but instead they'll treat the symptom rather than the problem. So speak to that issue, because in some respects we're missing an element of that if we simply go to an individual that doesn't look at that from a holistic kind of Christian approach. True?
Sure, absolutely. There's anger, fear, and guilt. Maybe another word for anger could be hurt. I've been hurt, and it's unresolved. And so maybe I have unforgiveness in my life. Perhaps I have a hurt where I've been traumatized, and I've just become an angry person, and I've become embittered. So we need to look at that. That's going to cause some depression in one's life, and sometimes we don't realize the significance of unforgiveness or forgiveness in our life.
You also talk about this, these terrible triplets, because in some respects they all come together. I mean, you've probably been in situations, I know I have sometimes, and I'm not the counselor you are, but still you end up in counseling type situations where you've got anger, your guilt, and fear all together, and they're almost synergistic, and they feed upon each other, don't they?
Absolutely. If I'm angry, I'm probably afraid. Fear is a big word. A lot of things can fit under fear. Worry, man, maybe I'm just worrying. It's what if this happens? And I'm full of worry. And worry is somewhat of a mental process. But if I worry enough, I can turn that into the next level of fear, which would be anxiety. If you have anxiety, usually you're going to have some physical symptoms. The sweaty palms, I feel it in my stomach. So there's the different physical symptoms that come when anxiety is invading your life.
We're told in Philippians 4:6 that we're not to be anxious about anything, but in prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And we're even told in 1 Peter to cast our anxieties on him. But it kind of brings us to the chapter here on how can we deal with those toxic emotions. And your argument is, and I think it's certainly a very powerful and biblical argument, is the antidote for many of these toxic emotions you've already talked about, and that is forgiveness. It's a remedy and even a relief for depression, isn't it?
It really is. And I don't mean to oversimplify forgiveness, but forgiveness can be an area that we need to look at in our lives that may have a connection. We really want to become what I'll call initiators of forgiveness. We want to be the one that's, in teaching forgiveness and practicing it. Now, forgiveness does not imply agreement. You can be hurt by somebody, and it doesn't mean at all you have to, like them or agree with them. But forgiveness releases the power that it has in your life.
And one of the things I love is that you have a illustration from the movie, which I enjoyed watching, Seabiscuit, in which you have Red Pollard, played by Tobey Maguire, that actually lost the race, the horse race, because he said, well, he fouled me. And I think it was a great illustration that you lost sight of what you were trying to do, that is win the horse race, because you were trying to catch up and retaliate against an individual that fouled you. And so in some respects, that was a perfect metaphor for life. We go out of our way. Somebody cuts us off on the freeway and I'm going to get back to them, or somebody wrongs us and we forget what our real goal was in the first place because we are so interested in getting even, in retaliating. It was just a great illustration out of that chapter. But since we're talking about this idea of soul, it brings immediately into a book that you've written in the past and a chapter you have here, Strength Through Soul Care. That's probably a new term for some of our listeners. So when you talk about soul care, what do you mean?
Well, soul care, is really a foundation for our faith. And how are we going to nurture our beliefs? How are we going to receive God's love and who God designed us to be? That all needs to be in who are we created to be? What's our life mission? So those are some big questions that we wrap into this category.
Yes, well, and again, you, of course, quote from Psalm 19 and other passages, and, of course, using God's Word to guide you is certainly appropriate. But I want to keep moving because there are just so many other great material in this book, and we've talked about mind, we've talked about soul. Let's now talk about body. And, again, sometimes when we go and have a doctor look at our body, they may hit some of the points, but not all of them. And the first thing you say is start moving, start improving physical activity. And whether it's Dr. Ken Cooper, who's been on this program, or a variety of other individuals, there is a sense that sedentary lifestyle itself can cause some of the symptoms of depression to surface, right?
And we don't even realize, too, just the lack of movement, the lack of exercise. One of the things, and by the way, drink your water, drink lots of water.
Yes.
When we're under chronic stress or depressed and anxious, we tend to maybe drink other things. 10 cups of coffee a day will not help you. So, it's like get the water, get the movement. Here's what we know, and we see people. I had a guy here. We're a facility where people come for care. Mm-hmm. And we had somebody, it took energy for me just to walk around the block.
Wow.
And, it's like I was out of breath, but now I'm 6 times around and I'm feeling so much better. So movement, and we do know movement does a lot for us, but we need to start somewhere. And just imagine what you could do in the next 30 days. And really, we begin to see some really significant results with this. When we start to move about at the 3-month mark.
Yes.
So it does work.
And again, we oftentimes think about physical exercise helping cardiovascular health, and that's true. It will help you to sleep better, probably strengthen muscles and bones. But you also talk about the fact that many of these essential brain hormones, dopamine, serotonin, many of the endorphins, and others all are stimulated as well by physical activity, aren't they?
Oh, yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And, there's a chemical, dopamine, that also is affected when we begin to exercise. And I know for some the word exercise is not, the most positive word. And now, we're hearing a lot about, movement, just move. And so whatever it is to you, move. But we know that these chemicals, it takes a little bit of time, but they will make a difference. And you will feel better. Now, I don't mean it's the cure-all, but it will whatever you're doing with exercise, it'll amplify all the other good.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about a few other things for your body. Obviously, good food. Also, getting rid of those toxins. What about your gut health, which we've talked about, but it's been actually years now since we've done that. And even some of these micronutrients, because, again, we're trying to help you understand, or somebody that you are working with who is dealing with depression, that it is the whole person, and we're looking at mind, soul, and body. And that's why I think you're going to to really enjoy this book. And if you find yourself saying, well, I want to get more into some of those other issues, of course, as you might imagine, Dr. Gregory Jantz has authored so many other books dealing with such issues. We just talked about soul care a minute ago, and of course, many others. So again, you can find out more information at our website. And of course, you can probably find the book in your local bookstore, but if not, we've made it very easy for you to get. And when we come back, we'll also talk about this booklet, 7 Answers for Anxiety. So if depression's not the issue and anxiety is, well, we've got some material about that as well. So we'll continue our conversation right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Dr. Gregory Jantz. And again, the book is entitled Healing Depression for Life. Okay, let me ask you a question. Now, as you have been in sheltering in place, we've had our lockdowns and everything. Have you lost weight or have you gained weight? I suspect most are going to say the second category. And that's one of the reasons why in Chapter 10 you talk about the need for good food actually equals good mood. And then also you talk about the time to take out the trash, because in some respects it is important to detox your body of some of the pollutants which affect your wellness as well. Can you explain kind of how that all comes together?
Yes. Well, one of the things that's happening is the more that we've had quarantine and confinement, we've talked about movement, they are moving less. And by and large, there's been weight gain for many. And maybe our nutrition or our diet hasn't been the best, and we've used food as a source of comfort.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new term right now that's out there. Maybe you've heard of it, COVID-15.
Yes.
COVID-15. 15 is the 15 extra pounds.
Yes.
So
not for me, but for a lot of our listeners, I'm sure. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
So maybe we need to look at, okay, what am I doing to take care of myself right now? And it's so easy to, when people are anxious, many do tend to overeat, or your depression. We tend to overeat, oftentimes not the best things.
Yes.
We love sugar and sweet and smooth foods like ice cream, or you tend to migrate towards things that usually are not the best choice.
Not exactly. And one of the things I wanted to get to, because I kind of jumped over those chapters because I think a lot of people said, okay, you've already been preaching at me, you already know that. Is your gut stuck in a rut? And that is, a lot of people would say, what does my gut have to do with depression? And actually, in this chapter, people, if they took the time to read it, would see the whole issue of neurotransmitters, the issue of psychobiotics. That's really important, isn't it?
You know, what's interesting is this gut health and probiotics and the relationship to mental well-being is becoming more and more well established. So a healthy gut, and we know that there are certain God-designed bacteria that live in the gut that do affect our emotions and our brain health. There's a nerve that connects the gut with the brain called the vagus nerve.
Yes.
And so what happens in the gut will affect the brain. So that's a part of looking at the whole person.
And again, just a very insightful chapter for a lot of people that weren't familiar with that. But I wanted to get to one more, and then we'll talk about this new booklet, 7 Answers for Anxiety, and that is the magic of micronutrients. I mean, there are people out here that say, selenium, I don't even know what that is, or the importance of vitamin B12 or folic acid or a number of others. You really help us understand that sometimes we don't pay attention to all those vitamins, and those are key in terms of the chemical reactions, and a lot of them are key in terms of producing the various brain hormones that will give us positive mental health, won't they?
Yes, and this is the overall vitamin, mineral, nutrient. We need to look at this. We know a deficiency of vitamin D will result in some depression.
Yes.
So these are things that are so important that we look at. We know that certain B vitamins have a lot to do with emotional well-being. So let's just be wise and be willing to look at, is there nutrient deficiencies?
Yes. Well, just before we go on to talk about a couple of things, first of all, this booklet, and then also what is on your website. This booklet is also one that we've linked on our website, pointofview.net, 7 Answers for Anxiety. And you are recognizing that there are a lot of people that have anxiety, panic attacks. Sometimes anxiety surfaces in other ways like depression. And so you really are using this as a kind of a simple little booklet where you give people kind of a game plan for what to do in the next 30 days to deal with this issue of anxiety. So how can people use this particular booklet along with your book?
One of the things, people, if you're anxious, you need information in brief, spoonfuls, so to speak.
Right.
And so we give simple, because, concentration can be hard if I'm anxious. So you need simple strategies, and that's what we're doing here. Just some things you can begin to do, to look at. And let's, look at this and go, okay, today I need to make a decision. I've suffered too long, and find out what are the options. Get some good resources.
And again, one of the things I like about this is you've got a place where you can put down your fear, the likelihood that it would happen, my current fear, as well as what could happen. And in some respects, anxiety is fed by people taking the worst case scenario and believing that that's going to happen in the future. So if I can kind of summarize some of the material in the book and how people hit the panic button and have the panic attack, this is just an attempt to, once again, help people think through what's going on in their brains, what's going on in their souls, and then a whole section here on foods and things like that, what's going on in their body. But just before we run out of time,
I wanted to encourage people, if they would like to contact you, there is, of course, a link on our website, aplaceofhope.com. And so if people wanted to know more about some of the services that you provide, if they'd like to have you come and speak once we get out of lockdown here, or if they would just like to be able to have access to the incredible number of resources that you have generated over the years, tell us what we will find when we land on your website.
Well, there's a lot of good, just free information on depression and anxiety. So begin to gather more information. Find out, what are the resources available? That's why I say today, take an action step today. Make a decision today that I can do something that is forward movement versus isolate and just remain in that fear paralyzes. So let's move out of that today.
And let me just mention that many times we suggest that you might want to watch a video. They have one video that's about 5 minutes long that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the things that Dr. Gregory Jantz and his staff are working in. And then we have a couple of testimonies. So you might get to one of those videos there, click on it, watch it, and then you might want to post that on your Facebook page or your Twitter feed or something like that, so that it would be an opportunity for you to help other people that are in your sphere of influence know that there are some answers. Because, Dr. Jantz, we don't need to have people believe that depression is a life sentence. There is an answer, and there is healing that can take place, and I don't want people to be stuck in anxiety. So one of the reasons we wanted to have you on today is, of course, it's always an important issue to address depression and anxiety, but especially with this lockdown and this pandemic, this has reached almost epidemic proportions. And so we're so grateful for the work that you've done, and I really appreciate you joining us once again here on Point of View.
It's good to be with you today. Very important topic.
We're going to take a break, and then we'll get into some more issues in the news. But if you find yourself saying, okay, I'd like to know a little bit more, we first of all have aplaceofhope.com, and you can click on that. We also have his Facebook page, so you can follow that. Then if you click on the button on the book, about 230 pages. It came out last August, so it should be easy to find in your local bookstore. But if not, we have a way in which you can order it in hardcover and in Kindle. And then if you scroll down a little bit further, this booklet is very inexpensive, and it's available both in paperback and Kindle, 7 Answers for Anxiety. And we just thought that this would be a topic that we've been talking about for some time. You've heard me talk about problems with suicide and depression and anxiety, concerns about a variety of different topics, overdoses, and all sorts of things. And so we thought that bringing Dr. Gregory Jantz back would be just a very helpful piece to that puzzle. And I would encourage you to find out more about the book and booklets, and also to maybe contact him if you want more information. When we come back, though, we will get into the pandemic. Dr. Deborah Birx has been in the news, and we'll talk about what she says and how some people have reacted to it right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
So we're going to get into the pandemic and some of the advice that has been given by some of the experts. But again, as we do that, I recognize that almost everybody has now pretty much come to their own conclusions about everything from the lockdowns to wearing masks to hydroxychloroquine. Matter of fact, you tell me what you stand on a couple of those issues. I can probably tell what your political affiliation might be as well. And we're sort of locked into our silos sometimes and our echo chambers, and we just listen to people that maybe agree with us. And if you don't think so, just go out on Facebook right now or Twitter and you'll see that. But I do want to still, from time to time, go to these experts, because after all, that's why they are in those positions, because they've looked at pandemics and they're trying to get the best evidence. And so my first article was one that I was just going to talk about in terms of what Dr. Deborah Birx has said. But even after posting it yesterday for our list today, I began to say, I guess we'll have to get into the back and forth between her and Nancy Pelosi and then the reaction from Donald Trump. But after a while, this does get a little bit old, because what she was trying to say as the coordinator of the coronavirus task force is she said, what we are seeing today is different from March and April. It's extraordinarily widespread. It's into the rural as well as equal urban areas. And so she was talking about that on CNN with Dana Bash. Now, that's really the same thing that we've been talking about as well. I, the other day, was pointing out that even though they wanted to open up our church services for Sunday school classes, my favorite line is, since yesterday was August 2nd, what's the difference between March 2nd and August 2nd? The difference is that a whole lot more people on August 2nd have contracted the virus. So your likelihood of actually being infected is much higher in August 2nd than it was on March 2nd or even April 2nd. And so, as she was trying to point out, there was a kind of safety for many of you that are listening to this broadcast in rural areas. But what she said is, to everyone who lives in a rural area, you're not immune or protected from this virus. If you're in a multi-generational household, she said, and there's an outbreak in your rural area or in your city, you need to really consider wearing a mask at home, assuming that you're positive, if you have individuals in your household with comorbidities. And again, this was a question that she was trying to address, recognizing that now many more people indeed have actually, in one way or another, reported testing positive for COVID-19. The latest numbers are about 4.6 million people in this country. In this article that we posted is at 154,000. Now it's up to 155,000 Americans that have died, according to the data of Johns Hopkins. And then she was asked, well, shouldn't the federal government, if you reset its priorities? And her response was, well, I think the federal government reset that about 5 to 6 weeks ago, and we started seeing this happening. And the point she's making is that now it probably is even more appropriate to not have a one-size-fits-all statement by the president or by Mike Pence or by Anthony Fauci or by Dr. Deborah Birx or whoever, because
because in some respects it varies from state to state. Even within a state, it varies from region to region. And so in some respects, she said, if you have high caseloads and active community spread, just like we're asking people not to go to bars, not to have household parties, not to create large spreading events, we're asking people to distance learn at this moment so that we can get this epidemic under control. So the point she was making is that we just almost have to take it closer to a case-by-case basis. I think what she had to say was very good, but apparently not. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, was very critical of her. As a matter of fact, in one point, she said, Deborah Birx is the worst. Wow, what horrible hands you're in. She accused Dr. Deborah Birx of spreading disinformation about the coronavirus pandemic. And if nothing else, said, well, I'm glad that Anthony Fauci has come to his senses. Well, as a lot of people pointed out, including she says, I've never really been called that before, because the argument was he's almost Pollyannish. And I think it illustrates again how political everything has become. If you are Anthony Fauci and saying some things that would seem somewhat critical of the president, then Donald Trump is against you. Nancy Pelosi is for you. If Dr. Birx talks about the fact that I believe we can get this under control, then obviously Nancy Pelosi is against you and Donald Trump is for you. And so she came on to the program after being asked about this and said, quote, I have tremendous respect for the speaker. I have tremendous respect for her long dedication to the American people. I think that it is unfortunate that the New York Times wrote this article without speaking to me. I could have brought forth the data. And a lot of people said that was almost cringe-worthy because, as one commentator said, who heaps plaudits on someone who's just called them horrible and worst? Now, again, they've got to recognize Dr. Deborah Birx is a Democrat, just like a lot of people in government are, especially many of the bureaucrats. But again, she said, I'm not Pollyannish. I've never been called that, or non-scientific or non-data driven. I will stake my 40-year career on those fundamental principles of utilizing data to really implement better programs to save more lives. But, of course, you knew that the president just couldn't eliminate that, could we? And so then a tweet came out this morning. So crazy Nancy Pelosi said horrible things about Dr. Deborah Birx going after her because she was too positive on the good job we're doing in combating the China virus, including vaccines and therapeutics. And so he would get kind of upset that she said nice things about Nancy Pelosi, but she was really just trying to stay above the fray. But it is impossible. If you say something positive about the coronavirus task force, then you're pro-Trump, and Nancy Pelosi and Democrats are going to come after you. If you say something that seems a little bit negative about the Trump administration or the way in which the virus has been handled, then the president's going to come down on you, probably some others as well, and you'll get praise from Nancy Pelosi. And it, I think, illustrates what Scott Moorfield said. He said, no matter what position you take on lockdowns, masks, hydroxychloroquine, or other COVID-related issues, there's a doctor or an expert out there whose opinion you can easily grab and use to bolster your case. We live in these echo chambers, he says. But he then goes on, as we'll talk about after the break, to say, look, I'm no doctor, neither most of you, but I am a functioning, thinking adult. And he said there's just a number of facts, figures, statistics, charts, and other patterns that are maybe not necessarily fitting the narrative being used right now by the media. So we'll talk about what has happened, for example, in Sweden, what's happened even closer to home in South Dakota, what's happened in Georgia. And then we'll get into, again, some of the impact that the lockdown has made. This is a very good piece that came out the other day by people at the Wall Street Journal looking at some of the impact economically. And, of course, we've talked about even some of the health issues associated with that. Then we'll move on because there are now many people, especially now in the Democratic Party, that are expressing real concerns about the mental health of the former Vice President Joe Biden, many saying he's reached a point of no return. So what does that mean for the Democratic convention coming up? What does it mean for the presidential campaign? We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Stephen McBride is predicting the end of college as we know it. Now, the key to his prediction is the last four words, as we know it. The prestigious universities will survive because they will always attract elite students and command huge tuitions. But what about the rest of the colleges that seem bent on teaching classes online? Cost will be a big issue. He reminds us that as recently as 1980, you could get a 4-year bachelor's degree at some colleges for $10,000. Now you will spend more than that in just one semester. Students are burying themselves in debt over $1.6 trillion in order to attend college. But will students and their parents be willing to spend that kind of money when the kids aren't living on campus and walking to lectures? Instead, they'll be sitting in their bedrooms watching professors on Zoom calls. The college experience has been stripped away by the coronavirus. Already, colleges that are reopening only online are offering tuition discounts by as much as $9,000. They know that students aren't going to fork over $30,000 a year to watch classroom lectures on Zoom. Soon, students will start looking for other ways to complete a college degree for much less than the cost of traditional college. At the same time, the existing online universities can hire away many of the best teaching professors and couple their lectures with great graphics, videos, and interactive features. And they can do all that for a fraction of the cost of brick-and-mortar schools. When all the dust settles, this will be a bargain for families who will save money and load less student debt on their kids. Much of the liberal and socialist indoctrination will also fade away. There'll still be colleges, but it looks like we are headed for some changes that will end the traditional college experience as we know it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's see if we can talk about the coronavirus and the narrative, and then what has been the impact of the lockdown economically, and that leads almost immediately into the second article we've posted here today, and that is Dan Bongino and others are saying there are more and more people in positions of leadership in the Democratic Party that are actually beginning to come to the conclusion that the vice president, Joe Biden, is at a point of no return. And what would that mean for the presidential election? What will it mean for the Democratic convention? This month now is August, and August 17th to the 20th is the Democratic convention. And then the following week, the Republican convention is August 24th to 27th. So we'll get into that in just a minute. But Scott Moorfield puts it this way, no matter what position you take on lockdowns, masks, hydroxychloroquine, whatever, you're going to have people staking out some various views, and in some respects maybe only listening to and paying attention to things that reinforce them. Now, that's called confirmation bias, and we certainly want to try to prevent that here at Point of View. But he says, I'm not a doctor, but I can look at these numbers and say there's a few things that don't fit the pattern that we've been told. He starts with, first of all, Sweden, which is something that really stood out very early on because, as we've talked about on this program, Sweden did not implement these kind of draconian lockdowns. which was kind of interesting. They never even mandated mask wearing. And so as a result, all the experts were predicting, as he puts it, that Sweden is going to look like something out of the book of Revelation, with rivers of blood and bodies piled up to horses' bridles. Just the fact he knows that tells me he must know something about the book of Revelation, because that isn't well known by a lot of people. But he says, of course, none of that happened. He says, absent any early Cuomo-style failure to adequately protect nursing homes that hurt their numbers early on, that country's strategy has been tremendously successful, and it was not something that people had predicted. And so Sweden originally was seen as a potential disaster, turned out not to be one. He then says, okay, let's look closer to home, and he talks about South Dakota and heaps a great deal of praise on the governor there, the Republican governor there in South Dakota, who again, back to the same point he was making a minute ago, refused to really shut down the state, nor even mandate wearing masks. And he said, aside from, of course, a very bad outbreak in a meat packing plant early on, which gave the numbers a bounce at that time, if you look at the infection and death rate, those have remained consistently low. How about our listeners in Georgia, again, where Governor Brian Kemp was supposedly conducting, according to some of the critics, an experiment in human sacrifice. Those are actual words that were used by people that were so critical of him because he was opening the state too soon, not mandating masks at a state level. And yet it was only when you started 2 months later did you actually see a spike. If indeed you were to say that by opening it up, you would have seen a spike really 2 weeks later, not 2 months later. But one of the individuals that we've had on this program in the past, maybe we need to get him on again, former New York Times reporter Alex Berenson says, let's look at 3 states, Arizona, Florida, and Texas. That's 60 million people which don't have lockdowns right now at the moment. Peak hospitalizations, 23,000, and daily deaths in the 500s range. Whereas New York, 20 million people, so it's its third as much. Hard lockdown, 18,000 peak hospitalizations, 1,000 peak daily deaths. And so you start doing some of these numbers and you're saying, what you find is that there isn't any this consistent trend. Now, I think part of that has to do with the fact that we recognize there are different strains of the virus, and so COVID-19 can be something relatively mild or even asymptomatic, and for others, a great likelihood that you would be put on a ventilator. But I love how he ends it. He says, look, these data patterns don't suggest that COVID-19 isn't dangerous or deadly. It obviously is. But they do suggest that viruses are pretty good at doing what they do, and there's not a lot that humans can do, especially through lockdowns and face coverings, to stop them. So he was really just trying to point out that when you look at all of this, sometimes you see many exceptions to the rule, and many of these dire predictions simply didn't take place. So that's one of those issues. But also, as we get into the political campaign, as we talked about on Friday, you have this annualized decline in the GDP, 32.9%. Now, again, that's an annualized number. That says that because the second quarter dropped 9.5%, if this trend continues at the end of the year, we'd have a 32% decline in GDP. Is that likely? Not too much, because you would hope that there would be a V-shaped recovery or a U-shaped recovery. Some say it will be more like a Nike swoosh and it won't recover that much. But the illustration that Dr. Merrill Matthews uses is to simply say, look, if I lose 5 pounds this month, then I guess I would predict that I would lose 60 pounds by the end of the year. 12 times 5 would be 60 pounds. No, that's not going to happen. And that's the same kind of thing being pointed out here by the editors of the Wall Street Journal, because they said Democrats and their media allies have trapped themselves in a contradiction. They're deploring Thursday's grim second quarter GDP report, even as they demand a repeat of the lockdown that caused the economic catastrophe. The greatest harm was from the collapse of consumer spending, which, of course, collapsed because individuals were not allowed to leave their homes. other than just to go to the grocery store. Consumer spending fell by 34.6% and accounted for about 25 percentage points of the GDP decline. That fall is also in transportation, recreation, home services, and the hotels. All of that was brutal. And interesting enough, one of the biggest surprises was a plunge in health care spending during the health care crisis. You know why that is the case, because the modelers were wrong, they say, and far fewer hospital and intensive care beds were needed. And so there was economic harm to the health care sector, even as there was a demand for the health care sector to address the issue of COVID-19. So if nothing else, one of the things you're going to see are these individuals calling for a lockdown, but at the same time lamenting that we've had such a decline in the economy. But the two are related, and so we'll see where that plays itself out in the next couple of months. While we're talking about how that plays out in a political campaign, I've posted, and this is our second article, Dan Bongino sources say Joe Biden is reaching the point of no return, and as a result, the Democratic leadership is really going to have to make a tough decision. He says people close to the situation say that former Vice President Joe Biden's cognitive decline is rapidly worsening and is becoming increasingly difficult to mask. And the Democrats, especially the leadership of the Democratic Party, are going to have to make a difficult decision. As he points out, we have an individual right now that hasn't really given anything other than a really short press conference, and even then has a list of hand-chosen reporters to call on and detailed notes on how to answer the questions. Absolutely nothing does is off the cuff. And it's reminiscent to something I wrote about a year ago. Probably more pushback on a column I wrote than any other one I've ever done. The commentary on April 22nd was, do we need to have the president, at that time Donald Trump, consider getting some kind of mental test so that people will not accuse him of having dementia? A lot of people said, I don't know why you bring it up. I said, I'm bringing it up because other people are bringing it up. By the way, those same people that were actually campaigning for a mental test for the president, they've all become strangely silent about the Vice President Joe Biden. As a matter of fact, the president did sort of take that advice and did do a mental test and apparently did pretty well. But now the people that were saying President Donald Trump is not mentally fit to continue being president aren't saying a whole lot about what I think is pretty obvious to just about anybody, and that is the Vice President, Joe Biden, really has lost more than just a step or two. And so the question, which I'll put on the table, maybe you have some thoughts, is whether Democrats will decide to figure out some way to change their presidential nominee at the Democratic Convention August 17th to the 20th. And if they do so, well, who was number 2 in the vote total? Well, that would be Bernie Sanders. Is that what the Democratic leadership wants to do? Which is why Dan Bongino suggests that maybe what they will just simply try to do is ride it out and hope that people don't notice. But I think it's becoming more and more obvious that people are beginning to notice, and that Joe Biden is just not the same Joe Biden he was a couple of years ago. It is a crisis we haven't faced in a long time. It sort of was inevitable. If Joe Biden is elected, when he goes into office, he will be older than Ronald Reagan was when he left office. What's your thoughts? 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
When you gift a point of view, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dies would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penn Dexter and Kerby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. and that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, we'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Second article we've posted here, has the Vice President, Joe Biden, reached a point of no return? That's not a statement being made by Dan Bongino. That is a statement that he records from individuals that are in the Democratic Party, some of their conclusions. And in some respects, I've sort of waited for a while to talk about this. One, because, after all, we have so many other things to talk about, but we're first of all getting very close to the Democrat convention, which will be taking place in 2 weeks from today. And certainly there are some important behind the scenes discussions that have to be taking place right now. And of course, the big issue is, even do you allow Joe Biden to speak at the convention? It's not going to be a live one, so in some respects that's allowed him to be protected, but you would expect a speech, even if it's scripted with a teleprompter, to cause people to either feel better about their decision to vote for him or not so good about it. But any kind of interview that would be done is going to be difficult. But the bigger question is, would you allow the former vice president to debate Donald Trump? This would be without precedent. You can go all the way back to 1960, the famous debates between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. And so there were some people sort of trying to see if they can come up with some possible excuses. For example, on CNN the other day, Joe Lockhart, who is a former Clinton official, argued that, well, you know, you've got President Trump. He's just so full of these conspiracies that even when Joe Biden speaks the truth, he'd twist this in ways and create his own conspiracy, which caused a lot of commentators to say, excuse me, the only conspiracy we remember was at CNN for years talking about this so-called Russian conspiracy, which the other day the Attorney General said was a great mistake. He had better words for it, but we'll just leave it at that. And so I don't think that one's going to work. So just a lot of questions about what happens between now and November and how much even Joe Biden would be allowed in public, and what kind of debate he would be doing or not doing, what kind of press conferences he would do. They're just all sorts of questions that are really without any kind of precedent. We've never been here before, at least in the modern world. Let's take some phone calls along the way, get some of your thoughts. James in Arizona, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, brother, and God bless you. How are you?
I'm good. What would you like to share?
I have a two-part. One is a statement and then a question. The statement is, we already have a track record from this gentleman. I don't hate him. I want to make that perfectly clear. But we have a track record that is so absurd, the things that he is okay with, and now he has a issue with his mentality. With it, it's a mental issue. Now, the question I have is America okay with this man going to make foreign policy or deals with foreign countries that want to control America? Because what if he has one of these so-called slip-ups and he signs America away? Are you willing to have your family under a man like that, or your wife, your children, your grandchildren, etc., citizens, fellow citizens? Are you okay with that? I, for one, am not.
Yes. Well, and again, when the vice president was had full mental capacity, we still know that in terms of China, he would not have a policy towards China that looks anything like Donald Trump for a couple of reasons. First of all, he on more than one occasion just dismissed China as being a threat. You think of the amount of money that his own son received. Forget Ukraine for a minute. How about just China and those issues? And, of course, the connection that China has had with other Democrats during the 1990s when Marlon Maddox was the host. How many times did we talk about the connection between China and Bill Clinton, China and Al Gore? And so those are just a couple of issues on the table. But as you point out, The pushback argument would be, well, yes, but he'd have a Secretary of State and he'd have a Vice President. Others make sure he didn't make any real mistakes. But I think the perspective, James, is going to be very quickly, we know he's not up to it, so who is going to be making these decisions? He was supposed to tell us who his vice presidential nominee would be by August 1st. I'm looking at the calendar. I think it's August 3rd, so he hasn't hit that deadline yet. But even if it is, I suspect it's not going to be somebody that's going to inspire a great deal of confidence. And as you said, he's agreed to a lot of ideas that in the past he would never have agreed to, because it almost seems like you have this Biden-Bernie kind of alliance being developed. And anybody that disagrees with that just simply needs to take the time to print out the Democratic platform, which will be revealed 2 weeks from today. And we're going to go into it in some detail over the next couple of weeks to point out that this may be the first time I can remember in which an individual is actually become more extreme after winning the nomination. Usually they run to the center, but this is, I think, something that is also unique in American history. So, James, you raised some really good questions.
Thank you very much. Why the secrecy would be another question.
Yes. Again, maybe Dan Bongino put it this way, so I might as well read what he says. He says he thinks that the Democrats will simply try to ride this out. He thinks that they will believe that Biden can win without having to debate, and that they might be able to have him win without actually having to campaign to any degree. He then goes on to say that if that happens and the former Vice President Joe Biden becomes the presidential nominee, then it becomes more and more obvious that he was not up to the task, and what will be the reaction from the American people. So we'll see what all that entails. But if nothing else, those are some very important issues to consider. Let's go back to the phones. We'll stay in Arizona for just a minute. KNLB. And Michael, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Yes, my question is, what is his work ethic? I keep hearing his advertisements all the time, but what is his work ethic? What kind of work has he actually done? What businesses has he owned? How successful were they?
Well, and again, he's been pretty much a career politician. His son has been involved a little bit more in some of those businesses. But again, the struggle that two of the leading nominees on the Democratic Party have were, first of all, Joe Biden certainly was occasionally signing on to some legislation, but doesn't have a lot to show for it. Bernie Sanders had even less. I mean, when you had people like Hillary Clinton, honestly, when she had to run against Bernie Sanders a number of years ago, say, what has this guy accomplished? Nothing, So you don't have a real significant resume of key pieces of legislation that have been passed. In both of those cases, you have no work experience in the private sector. And as a result, I think that's something that various voters need to consider as well. What have they been doing up until this time? And so that's just another issue on the table that deserves some attention.
Yes, I appreciate you. I've worked hard all my life, okay?
Yes.
I've owned businesses. I started working when I was 13 years old. I didn't have to. I came from a middle-class family. But I had a good work ethic. My dad owned his own business. My mom was a teacher. And I just don't understand people like him. and he talks about the American, how he's going to find jobs for all these Americans, but he's not even telling the truth about what's he going to do about the border. If he opens the border, then what are American people, what kind of jobs are going to be for real Americans?
Yeah. Well, and again, the point I'll make, since we're coming to a break real quickly, is that you look through this platform, and I would suggest to you that this platform looks nothing like the platform that you had for Bill Clinton or Al Gore. It really doesn't look like even a platform that Barack Obama wanted to run on, which goes back, of course, 12 years. And in many cases, there are some elements in this platform that don't even look like something that Hillary Clinton
wanted to run on 4 years ago. So there's always the argument, well, both of the parties have become more extreme. I would suggest to you there is almost no difference in the Republican platform since 2000 to now. And there is a remarkable difference in the Democratic platform. And if you think that's not relevant, the people that wrote the platform are probably the people that behind the scenes are going to be running the Biden White House. So that's why looking at the platform may be more important than ever before. It really shows you what they want to try to accomplish. Michael, you got a good point. I need to take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Okay, for a few more minutes, and I wanted to move on to my third article that we've posted here today, because you may have heard somebody say, you know, they were actually some of the rioters burning Bibles. And, of course, what you always get into is people say, no, that's just a bunch of fake news. Well, no, it's not. And that's why I posted this article, because what it is a kind of a good summary of it, but then it has links back to the Twitter feed, and a lot of these come from Ian Miles Chong, who actually, if you follow the link, you can go to his Twitter feed and you can actually see the Bibles being burnt. So you sometimes will bring this up to somebody and they'll say, where did you hear that?
Well, you didn't hear it on NBC, CBS, ABC, MSNBC, CNN, but you did hear it here, and of course it's well documented. But nevertheless, it has been amazing to me. You know, as we have pointed out before, it isn't just Confederate statues being pulled down. It's any particular founder that is being pulled down. It's even abolitionists, even former slaves, sometimes their statues being pulled down or defaced. It isn't just that buildings, federal buildings, are being attacked. It's businesses, and it isn't just individuals that are maybe officers or law enforcement officers. It's federal officers. It's a variety of others. And almost anything gets burned, and now even Bibles. So this particular article, wanted you to read it because it comes from the Federalist. Jordan Davidson did a good job of pulling together some pieces. So it only is going to take you a very short amount of time because you can print it out in about 2 pages. But then follow the links so that you can actually see the video of the Bibles burning. So if somebody says, wait a minute, you're just making that up, you have documentation for it. And again, the article there says a video posted to Twitter on Saturday shows rioters holding Black Lives Matter signs, tossing Bibles into a fire. Some of the Bibles look like ESV Bibles, but nevertheless, bystanders stood and watched as the flames licked away at the pages of the books. Now, the individual that posted this, I love what he says. I don't know what burning the Bible has to do with protesting against police brutality. And do not be under the illusion that these protests and riots are anything but an attempt to dismantle all of Western civilization and upend centuries of tradition and freedom of religion. And so those are just a couple of key quotes, but again, we've posted that for you so that you can read it. If you want to post it or take maybe some of the links and use those, that is certainly relevant as well. And I thought it would also be helpful, if nothing else, to go to another piece in the Wall Street Journal, which came out a couple of days ago, but I love the line. Maybe voters don't like violence after all. This one by James Freeman says, have Democratic politicians made a strategic blunder in not putting more distance between themselves and violent protesters? Because if you think about this, there hasn't been a lot being said by certainly the former Vice President Joe Biden and others about this. If burning a federal courthouse doesn't sell in Portland, Oregon, then it probably doesn't sell. And so he now then has a quote from the Oregon Journal about that and pointing out that even people in Oregon didn't really like this. He goes on to then talk about the governor of the state of Oregon, Governor Brown, in which she tells National Public Radio, we've been very clear that Oregon State Police will protect the federal courthouse. The federal courthouse is critically important to Oregonians. It's a tribute to Senator Mark Hatfield, he stood for peace. He stood for justice. And I love what James Freeman says. Of course, that's not been clear at all until Wednesday. Governor Brown, like other Democrats, is figuring out that violence is not popular. And so then they also point out the fact that one of the individuals who lost his job was a data analysis individual. And this analyst simply said, when I look at other polling data, we can see that the looting and vandalism in Minneapolis and in other cities like Seattle and Portland, in all cases, suggested that these incidents could prompt a political backlash that would help President Donald Trump's bid for re-election. Instead of the people in that organization saying, you're probably right, instead, soon after, he was actually removed from his job because, if nothing else, he was able to point out what somebody already knew. And one of the commentators put it this way. The man's name, by the way, is David Shore. He said David Shore did not say that protesting is harmful. He said that rioting is harmful. And he didn't say that data should dictate how people feel. And while one data scientist tweet of one political science paper should not be the last word on social movement tactics, the responsible response to, and the reasonable response to David Shore would be to counter with some form of evidence. But instead, in progressive circles, you don't have a debate. You just simply cancel
the individual. And so that was that. Our good friend Dr. Merrill Matthews was with us on Friday, and he has now 4 reasons why Trump can't be written off yet. And he said, first of all, the problem of peaking too soon. We know that athletes, especially runners, sometimes can peak too soon. And indeed, the peaking that has taken place with Joe Biden, it's nowhere what to go but down. Second of all, his point, which relates to what I just pointed out, voters want law and order. He says one of the great mysteries of this election cycle is why many Democrats have been reluctant to criticize the riots, looting, mayhem, and property destruction that is taking place in so many cities, and why so many also think that defunding the police is a winning issue. I think he's right on that one. 2 more real quickly. He said the pull to the left. Establishment Democrats must feel like they dodged a bullet when Joe Biden defeated Bernie Sanders for the Democratic presidential nomination. But now Joe Biden is trying to cast himself as a moderate progressive. It's not a contradiction in terms, because if nothing else, you have that 110-page Biden-Sanders unity document that shows, if anything, he's buying into virtually all of the socialist agenda of Bernie Sanders. And then number 4, according to Dr. Merrill Matthews, the Russian collusion hoax. He said by now it's clear that the Russian collusion hoax was initiated and funded by Hillary Clinton's campaign, and that key FBI personnel knew there was nothing there, even as they pushed the narrative and lied to the FISA court. And so he points out that there's a forthcoming report by John Durham. I suspect that'll come out after the election, but maybe not if it comes out before. Oh, my goodness. And so those are at least 4 arguments being used by Dr. Merrill Matthews, appeared in The Hill. And certainly that second one is one we just talked about, because I think the voters don't like violence, and this issue of law and order might be a big issue. And if there was a debate, don't you know that Donald Trump would make it very clear that the reason I sent in various federal officials was to protect federal buildings and to protect individuals being hurt, even some people being killed in some of those riots, and for then Joe Biden to lamely say, well, those aren't necessarily good either, is going to be not necessarily a winning issue. So if nothing else, just a couple of ways to look at how these things have transpired over the last couple of days. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about how we're handling the virus, that's our first article. Number 2, has the Vice President, Joe Biden, reached a point of no return? I give you the documentation for that from Dan Bongino. And then finally, rioters burning Bibles. I'm sure you're going to have some people say, nah, you're just making that up. Nope, you can actually see the Bibles burning right before your very eyes. And that's why we post these things at Point of View. Well, again, we have covered a lot of topics in the last 2 hours. Well, we've got a lot more to cover tomorrow, so I hope you'll join us then. As we go to the website, don't forget that my Viewpoints commentary is available to you as well. I talk about the end of college as we know it. Those last 4 words are very important. We'll always have colleges, but I think a lot of colleges are going to be changed because so many are going to online education and virtual colleges and virtual classrooms, and that's going to change everything. So you can find that on the Point of View website. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.